Exodus. It's not just a story of a heroic escape, but a profound journey of the human spirit, marked by struggle, redemption, and the search for meaning. More than a historical narrative, it's an allegory for every person's quest for freedom. Freedom from oppression, from fear, and even from the chains we place upon ourselves. We begin, as always, by looking back to where the story of Exodus picks up. The Israelites, descendants of Abraham, are now far removed from the promises God made to their ancestors. Over 400 years have passed since Joseph's family settled in Egypt, and during this time, a new pharaoh has risen to power, indifferent to their heritage, their rights, or their humanity. What we see in Pharaoh is more than just a tyrant. He is a symbol, an embodiment of every oppressive force that seeks to crush the spirit, to deny freedom, and to control. He dehumanizes the Israelites, forcing them into brutal labor, disregarding their lives, even ordering the death of their infant sons. In Pharaoh, we witness a reflection of unchecked power and pride, an arrogance that places itself above everything, even the divine. Yet in this darkest of times we meet Moses, an unlikely figure whose very existence is a testament to hope. Rescued from the waters of the Nile, he grows up as both an insider and outsider in Pharaoh's court. It's a curious contrast. Raised as Egyptian royalty, but always aware of his true heritage, he is a man caught between two worlds, two identities. And it is through this tension that Moses is chosen by God to lead his people out of bondage. The burning bush, this moment marks a profound shift, not just in Moses' life, but in the entire biblical narrative. When Moses encounters the bush that burns without being consumed, it's more than a supernatural spectacle. It's a symbol of God's enduring presence, even in the midst of suffering. Here, God reveals his name, I Am, a declaration that he is eternal, ever-present, and involved in the world despite the seeming absence many might have felt during their centuries of enslavement. But Moses is reluctant, filled with doubt. And this is key. He is not the flawless hero of legend. He is flawed, hesitant, and unsure, much like we are when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. Yet it is in this vulnerability that we can all find a reflection of ourselves. It shows us that divine plans often involve imperfect people, and that in the hands of God, even the unwilling can become instruments of profound change. So Moses confronts Pharaoh. And here the tension between divine will and human obstinance plays out. Pharaoh's heart is hardened not just by God, but by his own refusal to recognize any authority greater than himself. This battle between Moses and Pharaoh, between God and man, is a confrontation not just of political power, but of existential truth. What happens when man tries to defy the divine order? How far can human arrogance go before it leads to self-destruction? We see the answer unfold through the plagues, 10 acts of divine justice, each a blow not just to Egypt's physical might, but to its spiritual pride. The plagues symbolize the unraveling of a society that has placed its faith in power, in false gods, and in the oppression of others. Water turns to blood, the sky rains down fire, and life itself is disrupted. Each plague is a step towards Egypt's downfall, but it also highlights the cost of resisting the truth of God's authority. Yet even in this story of judgment, there is a message of mercy. The final plague, the death of the firstborn, is one of the most difficult passages to reconcile. But within this tragedy, we are given the image of the Passover lamb, a substitute whose blood on the doorposts spares those within. It's a powerful image that echoes forward to the idea of salvation itself, where justice is met with mercy and where sacrifice opens the way for redemption. With Pharaoh's resolve broken, Israel is freed. But freedom, as we soon learn, is not simply about leaving physical chains behind. As the Israelites march towards the Red Sea, they quickly face a new kind of challenge, a challenge of faith, of trust. How often, when confronted with the unknown, do we long for the familiar, even if it meant living in bondage? The Israelites, like many of us, struggle to trust that freedom comes with its own trials. And then comes the crossing of the Red Sea, one of the most iconic moments in all of Scripture. This is not just a miraculous event, it is a profound symbol of transformation. The waters part and the Israelites walk through, not as slaves, but as a free people. And when the waters close behind them, Egypt's power is finally broken. But the real question remains, now that they are free, what will they do with their freedom? How will they handle the responsibilities that come with it? What we often overlook is that freedom is a burden as much as it is a gift. It requires faith, responsibility, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. The Israelites are now free from Pharaoh, but as they wander in the desert, they quickly realize that physical liberation doesn't mean their journey is over. The wilderness represents the challenges of living out that freedom, of trusting in God when the path ahead seems unclear. At Mount Sinai, the narrative shifts again. The Israelites are no longer just a group of liberated slaves. They are being formed into a nation, bound together by a covenant with God. The giving of the Ten Commandments is more than just a set of rules. It is God laying out a new way of living, a path to flourish not just as individuals but as a community. Here, God is not just saving a people, He is shaping a nation to reflect His values. But as we know, the journey through the wilderness is fraught with doubt and rebellion. Time and again, the Israelites falter, questioning Moses and ultimately God's plan. Their story is our story, the human tendency to question, to resist, and to doubt when things don't go as expected. Yet through it all, God remains patient, guiding them forward even when they don't fully understand the path they are on. The Exodus story, then, is not just about a single event in history. It is about the ongoing struggle of humanity to trust in something greater than ourselves. It is about the tension between freedom and faith, between our desire for control and the reality that true freedom often means letting go and trusting in a higher plan. It is a story that reminds us that liberation is not the end but the beginning of a new journey. As the Israelites move towards the Promised Land, we too are invited to reflect on our own journey. What are the pharaohs in our lives, the forces that oppress us, that keep us from living in the freedom God intends? And when we encounter our own Red Seas, how do we respond? Do we trust in the path God has laid out, even when the way forward seems impossible? These are the questions that Exodus invites us to consider, both in its time and in our own. Ultimately, Exodus is a story of redemption, of hope, and of the long, often difficult journey towards freedom. It is a story that speaks to the heart of the human condition, reminding us that true freedom comes not from escaping hardship, but from embracing the challenges that come with it. And as we journey through life, just as the Israelites journeyed through the wilderness, we are reminded that God's presence is with us, guiding us, even when we cannot see the way forward. Exodus shows us that true freedom is not simply the absence of chains, but the presence of faith. It teaches us that liberation is not without its struggles, but rather it demands trust, resilience, and perseverance. The Israelites, though freed from physical bondage, were still bound by doubt, fear, and uncertainty. And isn't that the case with all of us? We may escape one form of oppression, only to find ourselves grappling with new challenges, be they internal or external. But in these moments, Exodus reminds us that God is not distant. His presence is constant. Even in the wilderness of our lives, He doesn't just deliver us from, but delivers us into something greater, a promise, a purpose, and a future shaped by trust in His guidance. So as we reflect on this ancient story, we are invited to think about our own journeys. Where are we in our own exodus? What freedoms are we pursuing? And how are we navigating the wilderness that lies between our current struggles and the promises that await us? Just as God led the Israelites through uncertainty, He leads us today. The path may not always be clear, but the promise remains. And in that promise we find hope, we find strength, and we find the faith to keep moving forward.